So if you have all fastened your seatbelts, Jan and Marco, you can start the engines.
All right, I'll get started and share my screen real quick.
Yes, and thanks for the nice introduction. Okay, so welcome everybody to the future of design decisions. It's a topic that Jan, me, and the full team have actually been working on for the last year. And I think it's a good view for everybody in the call to show you actually where we are heading in the future, hopefully, and what we are thinking about. Let me introduce myself a bit. My name is Marco. I'm a freelance design system architect working on large-scale multi-brand and headless design systems for like multi-platform, multi-language, multi-everything. And a little fun fact about me, I have 3 chickens. One is called Pepper, that's my son's, Fritzi, that's mine, and Gertrude, that's my girlfriend's.
And my name is Jan. I'm a product designer working at GitHub and one of the co-creators of CodeToken Studio itself. To describe what I like to do, it's basically create tools so others can work more efficiently. That's what I really like to do. And as a fun fact, I used to be an ambassador of Amsterdam, I think, a mayor of Amsterdam. Well, the name is something we share, but that's about it. So going into the topic of the talk, what are design decisions? The future of design decisions is all about that. We can describe these by saying something like they are purposeful selections made during the creative process to shape the form, function, and aesthetics of a product, service, or experience. And that involves a wide range of things. It probably involves more than just yourself, depending on the team that is working on that feature or product. So it's something that many people are involved in, such as designers, engineers, product managers, also customers. When we try to build a customer-facing solution, we need to embrace them as well and include user thinking into creating a perfect solution around that.
But let's take one step back. We all know about design tokens, most likely. It's kind of like a daily job for us to work with them. What are design tokens? They are like, there's one little quote from Atlassian that says, design tokens are name and value pairings that represent small repeatable design decisions. And then something we don't fully agree with, because a design token is only holding a stupid information, right? It's only holding a hex value, a font size, like some arbitrary value, but not really the decision to get to that value. So we kind of would say that's more like design tokens are name and value pairings that represent the outcome of a design decision. Because in every decision, we have some process that we go through to actually get a value. And that value then is stored in a token.
As one of these examples, you probably already created a bunch of these color palettes or color scales. And the outcome of that is a hex value that you would then store in a design token. But the decisions that go into how you reach that scale, that's something that we don't really store in design tokens just yet. You likely chose a base value, such as the red on the left side, the 500, and then decided you want to get some more colors based on that. You chose something like a curve to indicate how the colors should be chosen. And you chose these not at random, but by doing so that they reach a certain color contrast, so that the different colors can be used for light and dark themes, but also match color contrast required for accessibility, for example. And there are certain tools that allow us to do that. There is GitHub's Primer Prism, which lets you create these color scales based on curves, so you can really fine-tune that. Or Leonardo by Nate Baldwin, where you can create, based on logic, your color scales and then reuse them, export them, whatever you want to do with them. But all of these tools have one thing in common. They export something to a static output, meaning that you get design tokens as a hex value out of that, and that's what you store.
So looking at that, Jan just showed like this, like scale generation. We have the same when we look at colors that you choose that are in, like on our foreground color, like our text color primary here. That's an example of Goldman Sachs, where you can see a default color mode and a dark color mode. And we can see this text primary actually switch from a gray 10 to a gray 110. And this is like a decision we can make as designers. But most likely it follows some logic, right? Most likely we have some contrast checker in the background running. So I here used APCA to check like the contrast to our background. And we can see, okay, with the 110, we have like a 106 lambda in APCA, and like with one value in between, we have 44. So we could say that is the insufficient contrast. And that would be one design decision where we say we want a text that has a lambda of 60 at least to give us a accessible color contrast for our design solution. And that is a design decision we are taking. It's not like just knowing why there is like one specific hex value. It is actually knowing how we got to this value. What was the decision to actually get us to this value that we're currently using?
And then we have tools such as Shaper, which let us see the effect that you can have when you have a dynamic design that is connected. So you could have a spacing value, these controls that you see at the top. The tool basically lets you change these and reorder them and make them bigger, increase the spacing unit, and you would see the effect in the whole UI. I'm going to post a link to that one after the talk so you can explore that in more detail. But this interconnectedness between these decisions is quite exciting, where you change the base hue and any other hue would get changed, or you change the typography text increment and all the typography gets larger. So that's showing us a world where connected design can really benefit everyone. Or Yesenia Perez-Cruz talk and book on expressive design systems shows this state of different brands, but they are walking across different dials and levers. So you have Airtable here. The left side is the marketing brand side. The right side is the more product-oriented side. And the marketing side has a more large and airy feeling, while the product side is a more information-dense feeling with more on the small and compact scale. But it's still the same brand. It's just working across a different angle of the different spectrum, basically.
So what did we actually do to store these design decisions? We worked on a new thing that we call a graph engine. A graph engine is actually based on a graph that does these decisions, right? So we invented this technology that lets us create a full path actually for our decisions. It lets us generate different things. And here I have the visualization of like a synthesizer board, kind of. Just copyright, it's Midjourney, nothing special. But you can see like it's having a bunch of wires that are connected to different modules that actually give us different outputs. So I love to draw this like kind of relationship to music here. We have a bunch of different things that actually influence what we are doing and how we actually get somewhere and how we get a melody. And that's kind of what we try with the design decisions. So if we look at the current token set, we have our sets, and then in the Token Studio plugin, we have a theme file, right? That theme file is actually our current resolver or generator that actually holds the information how we parse sets, what sets are active, what are inactive, and which order they are actually like combined together or overwritten. So moving forward, we have this design based on logic. So we have inputs and outputs. And here we have a color scale generation node. This color scale generation node actually uses a few inputs to give outputs. We have a base color and we have scale steps. Yes, there's a little typo here. That's like just, sorry. But as you can see, we just give it a base color and steps and we get a full scale as an output. And that's the power of this like generator, like design decisions that we have, because we can reproduce. We can manipulate with little inputs and dials to get a quality output that actually is driven by design decisions. So we broke that down into 3 pieces: resolvers, generators, and workflows. It's quite hard to grasp that, so let me again draw association with music. If we look at an orchestra that actually creates this symphony, oops, that was one too far, that creates a symphony. The symphony is kind of our workflow. It connects everything. It connects the composition, the artists, the full melody, and gives us one musical piece.
Move the focus through
Okay.
all of the elements.
Thank you. So the full orchestra gives us our workflow. So that's our workflow. Then we have the composition. Somebody wrote that piece of music. And that piece is like our generator. So where we define the notes that need to be interpreted in the right way. And then we have the musicians. The drums, the piano, the violin, all of these interpret different pieces of these generators and work differently, but all connected together give us this output. So the musicians are the resolvers, the composition is the generator, and everything together is the workflow. That's how you can imagine it. So Resolver just gives us one piece of that big picture. And that's how we actually want to go from static data and references to boundaries and logics. We want to move away from just having the static hex value standing somewhere. It's nearly impossible for us if we get a token set to reverse engineer, like how did we actually get to this one hex value? And it's very hard to set boundaries where we want to move in. Like maybe there is a range of color that we can use that is contrasting enough in our system. And that's kind of like a part of what we want to do. So let me give you a little demo in actually what we do. Jan will share a link with you in a second. That's actually our Resolver playground. And I'm going to steal his screen sharing for a second. So this is our interface, the playground. It is fully accessible for everybody. And if you load up the interface, you will be greeted with this massive graph here. Yes, it looks intimidating at the first glance because it holds quite a lot of information. We will give you a little glance into how we want to simplify this in the future in the later step of the presentation. But what we're doing here is actually creating this card on the bottom. You can see on the left, we have the nodes that we use. In the middle, we have our graph editor. On the bottom, actually here, we have the editor and we have our preview. So all of this is live, working in code and like being generated out here. So we have an input on the left here and an output on the far right. And everything in between is design decisions. So one decision in here is actually a contrast node. So in here, we're actually taking the background color of the button, taking two foreground colors, white and the black, and checking which one of these actually has the bigger contrast, and then using the one with the higher contrast. There's another node that we have that has actually sufficient contrast in there too, if it is sufficient. So that's actually how we select our text color for the button here. But that's just one card, right? But here I have my inputs. So let me just show you what this one card really is, because it's more than just one card. It is more than 200 different versions of that one card. So by changing my theme, I could change it to a different brand. So my Knight brand or my Viking. That one we know, right? We can do this with tokens already by overriding. But we are already dynamically choosing the on colors on our elements here. So now let's go to a tinted card that we have, and we can switch our color mode to dark. It's working too. And let's switch our language to Arabic. And we even have a right to left version in here already. Or let's go to German. Also works. Now let's go back to our Knight theme. And let's go back to light. And let's do a different elevation of the card. And that's not neutral, but we want a tinted card. So you can see everything is changing according to these little inputs. So changing back to my samurai, that still works. So we have 200 cards just by this. And now if I change to my personalized card, I could even have endless versions, because we have one little node here that's just like a playground node for us, which is a color extraction. So I could just feed it any image in here. Just some random, oh, that's the wrong link. Let me get the Unsplash random. Just some random Unsplash image. That is maybe not the best version. Let's take another one. That actually gives us different colors, right? So by extracting the colors out of this node, we can create different versions of this card. And you can see I just pasted it in here. Let's change the inputs again to English. That card still works, right? Let's change it to level 0. Everything is there. I just posted a different image and we didn't need to change anything. Just gave it one little input differently and it all worked. So back to you, Jan, to the presentation.
All right, I hope you can see my screen again now. Perfect.
Working, great. So what we showed you now in this graph was actually just the basics of design decisions. But we also have components and patterns, right? And they also require decisions. And there's one beautiful example actually from Workday in the Canvas design system, where they use these decision trees to give you a help in selecting the right component for your use. So when to use the primary button, when to just use the icon button, and how to use the tertiary button, when is it there. So all of this is again based on decisions. So if we connect these foundational decision trees with this component and pattern decision trees, we are already far a step ahead into AI world of generating, where we're able to use these decision trees to generate interfaces that live in the boundaries that we define.
And with all that said and done, context seems quite important. So with context on where an element sits in, but also the context that we feed that element, things should change. So let me give you an example of that. Basically, a similar example that Marco was showing you, but a bit broken down. So you can see a card here that has a light gray background on a white surface, and the text is black on this gray. On the left, there is the switch where you can choose between different brands, different themes. The component is a card. The variant is standard, and the surface is default. Now, if we change that to the dark version, we change that to the black background and the dark gray background color for the card. The text changes to a white, and also the foreground muted color changes to a light gray. Now, if you change the surface from default to tinted, what happens is that not just the color of the text on it changes, but also the muted color at the top, where it says October 2023 changes to this slight reddish color as well. And one important detail there is that the button on top of that card, it changed to have a white background. That is because if we zoom in, the button has a variant of primary. That means the button wants to stand out compared to the background. So the background is already important to understanding what the button should look like. Because if we change that back to the light and default surface, the button again would not be white anymore as a background color because it wouldn't stand out anymore. So the button would kind of change its appearance based on the context that it lives in. So all of these design decisions that we make, they kind of need to become traceable for the sake of dynamic design decisions. But there is another good reason to do so. When we started work on this tool that we called Token Flow, which is a way to visualize your design token references to one another, we kind of built it like this. You can see all your different token sets. They are connected to with different connections. And you can see there is one token highlighted, the focus token, which gets its value from the accent emphasis token, which again gets its value from the Colors Blue 500 token. And all that is great, but it really doesn't show you why a decision was made. We don't know why the Colors Blue 500 was chosen. It might be that a designer just felt like it. It might be that the color contrast value was sufficient and that it allowed us to choose this value based on these logical decisions, but we have no way to really define these unless we document them properly. And this documentation currently lives outside of design tokens. So that's quite a disconnect, I would say. But the other problem with this approach where we don't store our design decisions inside of our source of truth is that if you leave the company or if you join the company, then you don't have that knowledge. So you kind of need to have explicit knowledge that endures. If you join a new team, you should be easy to onboard. You should understand what's going on. And that's something that this dynamic system would really allow us to do. If we look at this example that Marco was showing in a similar vein, we can see the contrast node on the right. It gets a color as an output, but the input is 2 colors, and we just compare that to the background. And depending on that color threshold of 60, either the first color wins or the second color wins. So if we design everything based on this logic, we get into quite a complex piece, but we think we can break it down a bit further.
So why does design need to lead? There's another question that came to our mind. So we have all these logics that we're building now. And most of the times, designers actually lead in the process of creating something. But why is this like this? Do we really need to always have designers leading that? And we want to emphasize something in the way we create. We want to get design and development closer together. So all this resolvers and generators and like this graph interface we are sharing will be multi-user supporting. And we want people to join together and figure out the logics of their components and systems. Have developers, designers, and project managers work together in creating like the logics first and then just filling in the blanks so we don't miss different states, right? We don't miss that little edge case that we are not thinking about. We want to be able to permutate through the options that are actually available as inputs for our components, that you get like this massive sticker sheets of what you're actually able to do. And by that, you're very, very fast in like iterating through and like defining edge cases and not finding them later on when your product is live, but finding them in a shift left, kind of like as the early as possible. And then nested resolvers. So that's something where we looked at this intimidating big graph that has everything in one flat picture. And we are changing this by introducing nested resolvers. Nested resolvers allow us to actually create one resolver with its inputs and outputs and actually box it into one little node. So you can create your big nested resolvers that maybe have a color generation in there. For example, here we actually have our color scale gray on the left side. And that is actually used through our system. Most of the time, a gray scale is actually what we use in every side. And this one is actually nested as a resolver. So if we open that up again, in here we have the generation of the scale, where we actually create the tokens for that color scale, group it, and then output it into our other resolvers where we can use them. And this would declutter the full card example that we showed you and bring that down into small understandable pieces where we can group like the full contrast on color into one sub-resolver. Maybe it has like 20, 30 nodes, it doesn't matter because it's grouped into one little piece.
And that kind of leads us to this thought that we were having on if every company reinvents all the time, then we won't get as much innovation at it as we could. So instead, we'd like to think of these different nodes to be something the community could contribute, could build in a marketplace, in a community place, much like Figma's community. Imagine you creating an accessible color scale. It would be a shame if that was something that only you would benefit from. You should be able to publish that for others to use, just as an input node that you would be able to use in the more complex graph that we were just showing you. So the whole system is quite extensible and already is. So you could technically just build your own node. It's something that you would most likely need a little bit of developer help with, but ChatGPT would do a great help, I would say. And the other piece there would be that with the plugin of Token Studio for Figma, we already tried to build it in a way that doesn't replace tools, that doesn't force anything on you, but sits in the middle of things. So you could use the output however you wanted. You could export that JSON and use it elsewhere. That's also something we're doing here. It should sit between tools. You should be able to use it coming from Figma or using that as a source in GitHub or in GitLab or Penpot or wherever. So this whole system of dynamic design decisions is something that we believe could be at the center of things as well, could drive the design tokens outputs.
We are also offering you different choices how to work with it. So as a designer, you most likely want a visual editor to create these logics. But we also offer you to actually change that graph. It's just stored in a JSON format, and you're able to manipulate it in your system. If you want to have just a raw minimized node and maybe add something in your code later in the execution, you can bring that, as Jan said, to any platform. There's even a Go port of that graph engine already to bring it to native devices and have it render in like runtime. And it's very performant. The performance hit is like not noticeable at all. And that's where we want to head. Like you can use that one to predefine generation. You could use it to create scales and all that, just to create sets that you're using in the future. Or in the future, also think about like live interpreting by the user's inputs. Like when the user chooses a background image, we actually reinterpret the full design system to give it a customized version of it. And we also, again, want to focus on the collaboration between everybody in this system. It should bring everybody closer together, and it should help designers actually see a live representation of the component and what their changes actually have an effect on, like in the final components. And also give us the option to really iterate through components very fast and find these bugs and problems.
So what we're building with this graph engine is something that is going to be a core of the Token Studio platform, which aims to be a design token management solution. We're currently looking for early adopters on that one. And it's basically going to feature the same dynamic design solution that we were just showing you, but baked into the platform, so you could have interconnected dependencies between your different projects. Use something you defined at the foundation level and use that in one of your brands, for example, and then transform quite easily to something like CSS using Style Dictionary in a plug and play way without having to have the full overhead of trying to do it your own way, but integratable into your own. So you could just detach whenever you want and customize it to your liking. But nothing great like that is ever achieved alone. So we truly believe that we need this to be open source and we need this to be something that anyone can contribute to. So we already open sourced that graph engine that Branko was showing you, which drives all of this behind the scenes. We've already seen some good contributions there and would be very interested and curious to see what you all might come up with as well. So with that, thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome. This is like the spaceship taken off. I also like the dark background because it really relates to the space thing. Okay, so we're almost out of time, but if you have some more minutes to ask a couple of questions.
I would love to. I can already see one question actually coming up in the chat.
Yeah.
Which is, at the moment, there is no token that represents text alignment. Correct. That's not there, and I showed you off like the alignment. So let me share for a second my screen again. We didn't dive too much into that. There's a few other talks where we like focus a bit more into that, where we actually want to change how we think about components. At the moment, all of us are building component tokens, and we are like struggling with naming and like all the depths of what we need there. And in the resolvers generators, we're actually going a different way. We're exposing the components' properties and filling them in. So what we actually have here, for example, is a CSS map. In the future, this will be a more generic map that translates to different platforms. This is at the current state a CSS map that really exposes these elements, CSS properties, and I can just assign them. So by that, thinking a bit in the bigger picture, you actually would not even need a token. You could go the full system to the component without even using one token in between. You could have this full flow without having one single token in between. And that's how we solve this alignment in this version. Yeah. So it's just like a CSS property of direction.
Nice. Okay, thank you already for picking that question up. And I see we have one other question that is, Rick says, we have 3 brands with different primitive core tokens, but the same semantic and component tokens. How can we use Token Studio for a multi-brand structure? We'd ideally work with a Figma file per component where we can showcase what it looks like per brand. Is that something you can pick up?
I could pick up that one. I think it just requires a bit of architectural level on the design tokens side, but you should be able to do that both with Figma's variables, like from Token Studio created, which would just mean a couple of references, different modes, or you could use it just using tokens itself. It would require you to have a set or different sets per brand, but then the semantic tokens just have a different reference to all of those. And then you would be able to switch between them. It is probably a bit of work, but we should have, I think, one example in our YouTube that goes into depth on that one as well.
Okay, great. Yes, and as I mentioned, it was really great having you guys. If anyone has any questions about this or want to, of course, they can watch this video again. But is there somewhere they can go to get more information about this?
Yeah, we do have basically the repository on the graph engine that I was sharing. We do have the playground running you can go to. We also have a Slack server where you could go to ask any questions. We're quite an active community there as well. So if any follow-up questions come along, please don't hesitate.
Yeah, we have a lot of content actually planned that is coming up soon on the topic. So feel free to stick around, subscribe, and check that out. Just play around with the playground. If you have any questions, hit us up all the time.